Smith takes on Smith takes on Smith in a Will Smith feature film. Plus, Breaking Bad attempts to break bad just one more time. That and more on today's episode of The Real Review, so stay tuned.
Welcome to The Real Review.
Welcome to The Real Review, sponsored by Parametric and Lazy Ape Studios. We get some of the latest happenings, real thoughts, and perspectives in the world of film and television. I'm here with Matt. Are you sure you don't want some soup? Hey?
Oh my gosh.
Are you sure you don't want any?
We got to talk about that later.
There's a lot to talk about with
Jesse
that soup.
Plemons. Hey, so...
that was probably one of the weirdest scenes. There's a lot of weird scenes.
We'll talk about that,
Yeah.
but...
El Camino here.
And I don't want to talk too much about some of the specifics and leave some of those surprises for people.
Yeah.
But everybody, I am here with Joel, one of the two best hitmen on this side of the Mississippi, Cunningham.
How do you know that, Matt? How would you know that? You don't know that. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. It's okay.
Yeah, I guess I can... perceptions can be deceiving. I don't really look like that much of a hitman, I think.
Yeah. I think that's probably your best asset.
It's my people see me and they're like, wow, doesn't look like much of a hitman.
And then bam, hit it.
Boom, hit him. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to The Real Review, ladies and gentlemen. Here we talk about a number of things, including hitmen's and soups and things. And here on the show, we're going to be talking about two films today, specifically Gemini Man and El Camino. Matt, before we get into talking about those films in more detail, why don't you give our listeners some ways to get connected?
Yo! Yes, you can all get connected with us a number of different ways. One being our website, which is realreviewmedia.com. And then you can also link to any of our social medias, whether it be facebook.com/realreviewmedia, YouTube, specifically Instagram and Twitter at realreviewmedia as well.
Yes.
And they all work together in a cohesive group hug.
Beautiful
Yes.
group fashion.
And that's how you can do that. And also you can reach out to us at realreviewmedia@gmail.com.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear your thoughts and perspectives and input. Here on the show, we just real quickly, if you're a first-time listener, we like to do things a little bit in our own style, where Matt tends to be a bit more of a fan. I tend to be a bit more of a critic. And so we put those two thoughts and sides of the coin together to give you kind of like the comprehensive review of the content. I'm just briefly going to talk about that because we do tend to tiptoe into each other's side a little bit, and I think especially with El Camino, we're both fans of the Breaking Bad series.
Oh,
so
man,
we'll probably have a lot of fanboying to do on both sides of that. So, but getting into things, we're actually going to start with the more major release for this weekend.
Totally.
I don't know as far as viewership who's going to get more views because they don't release their numbers on Netflix. I would actually imagine they're going to be pretty equal in number. But let's start with Gemini Man.
Totally.
So I'm going to start with the intro here, Matt, and then I will let you kind of give your breakdown. How does that
Bring
sound?
it.
Cool. So the synopsis for this one, very simple. An over-the-hill hitman faces off against a younger clone of himself. That almost sounds like a comedy. It's not very good. Director Ang Lee. It stars a couple folks, specifically Will Smith, as well as Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Clive Owen, Benedict Wong, Douglas Hodge. Those are kind of the biggest names that you'll see in the movie. And so, Matt, why don't you start us off talking about it?
Let's talk about Gemini Man.
Let's taco about it.
So let me just give you an overall feeling I had with this movie. Meh.
Yeah.
Maybe a little less than meh.
Yeah.
There's stuff I liked about this movie. And I think what I liked most about this movie, let's start with positives.
Yeah.
I liked concepts. I liked Will Smith. I think my favorite element of this movie is Mary Elizabeth Winstead. I think she's fantastic. This was a different role for her, I think, than what I've seen, a little bit more action-oriented. But I think that's it.
Yeah.
As far as what I found enjoyable.
Yeah.
I liked some action elements, but there's a lot of problems that go into with some of the other stuff that I had regarding the action elements. But there's, I don't know. I think that's probably it. I liked Will Smith. I feel like he gives himself, he gives 100% in what he does.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the script is, regardless of what it is, and you can tell that he's trying, and I think that says something that adds a lot to the film. If it was anybody else, I don't know if it would have worked. I mean, anybody lesser than somebody like a Will Smith or somebody, you know?
Yeah. Especially when you're going with numerous iterations.
I think Mary Elizabeth
person.
Winstead's character is my favorite character in the movie.
Yeah.
And what she brought to it, but then there wasn't really a lot to that other than what you were, the journey that you were on her with in the film. So I wanted to know more about what she had going on. But that's it.
Yeah.
Kind of is where I'm at. I don't know. What was your general vibe?
There's some good things. I want to say the first big negative, though, that I had for it was...
Are you going right to negatives?
Yeah, I'll talk about some of the goods, too, but I just want to get this one
Okay.
out. There was really no big story character arcs in this film. Will Smith kind of's character
There's like a pseudo.
Yeah,
like
basically Will Smith's character at the beginning of the film, it's kind of like, it's the Commando thing where it's like, I just want to retire and to go into nobody knowing me, but they won't let me because I am so, like, this is my Arnold. It's like the character that's already achieved
He's
being...
no good.
Yes.
I am suddenly Russian.
Right, I know, it's very bad. They're trying to get back to the place that they were at the beginning of the movie is kind of what it is. And that can work. That's more of like a story film. It's like a journey film because they're endeavoring to journey through this new hardship to get back to where they are. But the difficult thing about that is if done poorly, there's no real room for growth in the character because they're not trying to get really anywhere but back to where they already were.
Right.
And it ends up feeling like a giant circle. And I think for most of this movie, that's kind of what it felt like to me. It felt like a big circle where it's like, we're all starting in this relatively peaceful, good mood. Then we're going to go through all this crazy stuff just so we can get back to this kind of
The
relatively
biggest
peaceful
character arc was
Will Smith.
Will Smith, but not the
As
older
himself.
Will Smith.
Yeah, exactly. And so because he's such a minor character too,
Yeah.
until sort of the third act of the film, you
Yeah.
don't really get much of an arc for any of the characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's forward movement as far as like where their lives are at
Yeah.
potentially, but that's not really much as far as like how they've developed as a person. And so I think that was one of the biggest negatives of this film. But on the other hand, what it did really well outside of the special effects, because some of those were really bad to me. at times.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But-
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, but what they did really well was the actual action.
Yeah.
There was some scenes in this, especially like in the car chase happening.
The
in
motorcycle
Colombia,
chase?
yeah.
Yeah.
The motorcycle. That was really intense.
Yeah.
And that really did have me on the edge of my seat. And it's not like I felt like one of them was necessarily going to die.
We're talking about Ang Lee, though, you know?
Yeah.
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I mean, we've seen him do good action before.
Yeah, and there was a sensibility to the action where it felt almost like kung fu-ish.
Right.
You know, there was the way that the characters were moving and like predicting each other's motions and
Right.
kind of responding. And it was almost like a dance at times.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. And I
Yeah.
thought that was very, very well choreographed. And it was like, they would get into the story stuff and like the back and forth thing. And I'm just kind of like, all right, let's get back to the action because this is
Right.
not your strong suit right now.
I
You're
like
not
the
doing anything
opening,
with it.
too, by the way. That whole like train sequence, I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Reminded me of the movie Shooter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So any other thoughts?
That's it. I agree. I like the action. There's some cool stuff. Other stuff was, and this plays it in. I'm going to dive into the negatives here.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, a couple of things. One, the story I did not feel was very strong. But let me talk about something that, and as someone that likes to experience and just kind of like lose myself in a movie and I can overlook things a lot of times, something that ruined this movie for me was the high frame rate.
Yeah.
I didn't like it in The Hobbit and I didn't like it in this.
No.
It makes scenes look weird, and I think it changes the way that scenes are. I'm tiptoeing into your camp here, Joel, because this is a technical thing
aspect, yeah.
that bothered the heck out of me. The high frame rate doesn't work for me because it doesn't feel like a movie.
No.
It doesn't feel like it. I know it's a movie. I know it's cinema. I'm not Martin Scorseseing this right now. I'm saying it. I know it's cinema, but for me, visually, it makes it feel weird.
Yeah.
And I can't like reconcile. I've tried.
I think
a lot
part of it
times.
for me, this might be a subconscious thing, is television is at a higher frame rate. It's at 29 and film is at 24. So I think when you watch things that are at a higher frame rate, it almost feels more television-esque.
Well, soap operas film at a higher frame rate.
Yeah, they do too.
Yes.
So it feels more soap opera-esque, more
Yeah.
television-esque. It's like they've already claimed that ground of film. So let them have that and don't try and take it for film.
Yeah, documentaries do that too a lot of times. But here's the thing: is it not only takes me out of the movie, it also I feel like it cheapens the lighting in a given scene. The lighting was weird in some of the scenes. And I never talk about lighting. When I review something, it just made it look funny.
Yeah.
It made, even if it was a real scene, it made it look like it was a green screen. Like that's what I felt like the lighting looked like. And then the high frame rate also cheapened the visual effects.
Right. The video, I think that's one of the biggest things. I don't know what it is specifically. I've never done high-end graphical design for projects like this, but I would assume if you go with a higher frame rate, then your visual effects have to be much more detailed.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing, in a sense, a lot more of it per second.
Right.
So it has to look a lot more realistic. We had been approaching a pretty good place with that uncanny valley thing where it feels like with some films, like there's moments where like, yeah, that's kind of like, I could see that younger version. It was like, this was a huge step back.
Yeah. So Captain Marvel would be the most recent example I could think of.
Yeah.
And we'll see what the Irishman does or what that looks like. But apparently this isn't de-aging technology like what we've been using. This is just some sort of like motion capture, kind of like what they did with Tarkin.
Okay.
But it didn't work. There are scenes that did, especially let's specifically talk about de-aging for a second.
Yeah.
There are scenes that did look all right. But those scenes were usually darker scenes. Towards the end was awful.
Yeah.
There was a scene at the very end of the movie that was awful.
Yeah. Broad daylight, walking around.
Daylight, and like they didn't spend enough time on this thing at all.
There's a funny moment, it's a minor spoiler, I guess, but like one of the characters that CG is walking up to Will
really
Smith.
far away, and the waves.
Yeah.
Oh, that part was bad too.
But there's a character who's not CG, that's a real person, it's a girl, and she's like looking at him.
Yeah.
And looking at Will Smith, and it's almost, she's doing it because of the plot, you can tell, but in my back of my subconscious, it's almost like, is she aware how weird this looks? Like, because he looks so fake. He looks so like somebody literally just cut and paste him into the scene. It just looked really bad.
So here's the thing with this, and this is why I'm confused.
Yeah, and it took me out of the movie so much.
I don't know why they chose to do this. This is something different than the de-aging thing.
Yeah.
If you watch some of the fight choreography, not choreography, sorry, just the fight scenes.
Yeah.
Anytime you see there, first of all, there's a lot of like, it's hard to tell what's going on the way that it's filmed. It's either too close or
sometimes,
too dark.
Especially in the darker ones.
Right. So
that's why the Columbia one was a favorite one, because most of it took place in broad daylight outside. Yeah.
So here's the issue with that though, is they CG'd the character. Did you notice that like
a couple times?
The young Will Smith was entirely computer generated.
Yeah, a couple times, yeah.
And I was thinking the whole time I was thinking Matrix 2 and 3.
It looked like it.
And I was
that
like
rubbery kind of
I was like,
body.
What is happening? And I don't know why they did that. And they made him CG, and I could tell every time.
Yeah.
Even at the end where you see him like walking in broad daylight, his clothes are computer generated.
Yeah.
And I was looking at, he's like wearing like a jacket. I'm like, that jacket is not real.
Yeah.
I was like, what are they doing? Why are they doing this? They only had to do the face. Why did they change the whole?
And I think the point you're making, and it's valid, is it does look bad. And the thing it does is it takes you out of connecting with the characters in the moment, because you realize you're looking at a fake creation.
Yeah.
And then you can't relate to that.
Yeah.
You know, if this was an entirely animated film, then you could relate to it on the basis that that's just the world that we're in.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to create this real world thing and connect to it emotionally, but then it looks fake as all get out, it's like, how do I relate to what it is you're talking about and doing? I didn't like that, and that character in particular. I would just say the young Will Smith in this film is at the emotional core of the film. Yeah, and because he looked so fake so many times, it was so impossible for me to be like, okay, I'm on like an emotionally connecting moment right now.
It
probably overexplained it.
It was a step backwards because they can do a good DH throughout the whole thing. We've seen it with Sam Jackson. I think we've seen it, and he was in the movie just as much as young Will Smith was. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I will say the other thing is the dialogue felt very stilted and on the nose.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
There was numerous times they're talking back and forth, and I'm like, this is like one layer deep.
Oh, I will say,
there's like no deeper layer to what it is here. Or maybe there's like one layer deep and that's it.
I don't want to ruin this, but my favorite part of the movie involved a handful of teeth.
Yes. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I was like, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. I liked Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character in this. I think she was flat. I mean, to be completely honest, pretty much everybody in this film felt a little flat to me.
Sure.
It felt like they were all kind of like they were at a higher level, and then Ang Lee just said like, hey, take it down a notch. Just turn it down one or two. It was like they were recording practice runs of the actual takes.
Yeah.
and using those instead of like, all right, that was a good practice run. Now, like, really, let's get this. Let's connect with it. Now, there was a couple moments where it felt like there was some emotional connection going on, but everybody in it felt a little off. There was just something about it that just felt a little left of, or right of center, and I can't exactly get it. I think the worst of that was Clive Owen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he has these moments where he's supposed to be diabolical, or he's supposed to be like loving and caring, and he has these moments where he's trying to be manipulative, and others where he's trying to be like very realistic.
Yeah.
And everything felt the same to me. It was like, you're being loving, you're being manipulative, and it's like it's all like da 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 da. I just got really bored of his character every time I saw him on screen. I'm like, what kind of flat version are we going to see of you now?
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. So overall, I would say this isn't the kind of film you necessarily need to go watch in theaters. But the action did make up a lot for me personally.
Cool.
It was a bit hard to make out what was going on sometimes, but it was still fun.
Yeah.
I think the fighting and the back and forth, especially with some of the shooting, it just felt so, and a lot of it was the audio. I don't know if you got this in your viewing, because sometimes they change the audio, but every gunshot was like bang, bang, like really loud in the mix. So it felt like real, like visceral shots.
Kind of like what Nolan does in his movies. He like spends a lot of time on sound details and stuff, which is cool.
That Nolan guy is crazy. But that really got me into it a lot of the time, and really made me feel like I was connecting with it. Although when you start going too in depth with the whole sound thing, nobody wears earplugs. Yeah. And it's like they're all shooting so many guns at so many close range. Yeah. They'd be so deaf.
Yeah, I know, for real.
They should just make a movie about retiring or old age like hitmen that can't hear anything anymore because they've shot guns too many times.
Hitmen.
So they all just have to like constantly ask each other what's going on. So what are you going to give this one as far as rating?
I'm going to give it a 70.
Oh, wow. That's a lot lower than me, actually.
Is it?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 76.
Okay. That's not that low, much lower. I mean, it's half a grade, but C- for me.
When it's impossible to connect with one of the primary characters in the film because they look so fake, then you're going to probably not get a great grade.
I felt like awkward. I don't know. I felt embarrassed for like, I don't know. I feel like embarrassment for people when they have something that happens to them that's embarrassing, obviously, but I felt embarrassed for like Will Smith. I felt embarrassed for all the people working on the film. I was like, that's embarrassing.
Yeah, you'd be sitting there watching that in like the premiere or a theater, and you'd be like,
I'm like, I want to apologize. I'm sorry, guys. They didn't mean to make the effects this bad.
Yeah, exactly. It was supposed to be so much better. In my head, I saw it so much better.
I don't know. It's weird, but it's kind of a strange thing. But anyways, cool. C-.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is the big reason why this is like only the 76 range. I showed up here to get ready for the recording, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, I watched a movie yesterday. What did I see? I knew what I saw. I was like, I couldn't remember the name of it or anything for the life of me. It was like, this is a film based on a book, but for the life of me, I would have never been able to figure that out because it felt like a very simple, straightforward, bland story with.
There's another character towards the end, by the way, that was very like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix. By the way,
sure.
like the way that they're moving, I was like, this is.
They just need to start
this
that.
Is weird.
Cool. Yeah. Anyway, so we're gonna move on to our next film. This one is called El Camino. The name for it is El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie.
Yeah, magnets.
Yeah, magnets. How do they work? But we're gonna just stick with El Camino for now. So the synopsis for this one, a sequel of sorts to Breaking Bad, follows Jesse Pinkman after the events captured in the finale of Breaking Bad. Jesse is now on the run as a massive police manhunt for him is in operation. Starring some of the faces we've known and loved throughout the Breaking Bad series.
There's some cool surprises, I think, in this one.
There is, Aaron Paul, Jonathan Banks, Matt Jones, Charles Baker, as well as a handful of other people from the original show. I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but some of it is because I don't want to spoil it. Let you see who's in it. Because the cool thing about this is it's taking place, there's scenes that are taking place in the past. And showing like
but it's stuff that we haven't seen before.
Right, deeper information about the characters, but it's stuff we haven't seen before. And it actually impacts what's happening in the future with Pinkman's character. Yep. But they're not like just taking shots out of the show. Right. They're actually filming the actual characters, but from the past. So so what were your thoughts on
I loved it a lot. I mean, here's the thing. Breaking Bad, as heavy as it can be and how as dark as it can get, it's one of my favorite TV shows ever, but it's the most consistent writing, execution, everything that I've seen in any TV show. Yeah. it just progressively gets better and better. And it's not like there's that, oh, that one episode, like, oh, that was just a bad episode. Like I felt like every episode is good.
Great.
And especially when you look at it as a whole, like all together, it's just more special. And I think what works about this is yes, in my opinion, I think Breaking Bad has one of the greatest series finales of all time.
Yeah.
It sticks the landing, but this doesn't diminish that in any way,
Nope.
shape, or form.
No.
And it continues it in a good way, in a
Right.
logistical way too.
Yeah.
And also part of it is Jesse Pinkman, Aaron Paul's character is arguably, while the show it's really about Walter White, Jesse Pinkman's character is more of the heart of the show, I feel like. And I think more people connected with him throughout the show than I felt like connected with Walt. Walt was kind of a guy you kind of like, but you also hate him at the same time.
Yeah.
And the more as time goes on, you hate him more. But I think that's where people started shifting and like caring about what Aaron Paul's character was going through. And
Yeah.
and this follows him, and I think this does it justice. And I'm glad they got Vince Gilligan back and they just didn't just hand it off. And because Vince Gilligan, well, he directed most of it, wrote most of it. He didn't do all of it. And what he, did with some of the other projects later on with like Battle Creek was he started it, but didn't, and Better Call Saul, and he started it, but he didn't continue the series.
Yeah.
I'm glad that he came back to it because I think he's got a really unique eye and great sensibility for this world. And I would say the same thing with Better Call Saul. Why I really like Better Call Saul, that this just has more depth and heft and all that. And I think Aaron Paul crushes it. I think all the people in the show crush it, and I think the writing is really solid, and they continue it in a way that's plausible to what happened in the story. And there's moments that are tense, moments that aren't cheesy or silly, and it was great.
Yeah.
I just loved it.
One of the best things about, to me, Breaking Bad is that each episode had its own story arc.
Yeah.
And kind of built up, and things were started and concluded in each episode. But each season and the show as a whole had one huge overarching plot and story arc and building momentum. And there would be these arcs that would go on for, seasons at times that were like building is this going to get found out? Is this going to happen? And so there was the potential with this show that they were going to try and go like really big with it. But I really didn't feel like they did that. They didn't set this up as like, this is this huge grand adventure that Jesse Pinkman's now going on on his own. It was really a simple story of now what for Jesse Pinkman.
Yeah, or like,
and where's his life going to end up at,
like he, like I've seen, they talked about like the practicalities of, great, he escaped. Now what?
Right, exactly.
Kind of
what are you going to do after you escape from being in prison for that long?
Yeah.
How are you going to survive if there's a nationwide manhunt
right.
going on? And that was what we talked about this. That was one of my favorite parts in the show. We see a lot closer to the end of the show how there's this character that's very well known as being this like huge drug lord type guy, but you don't really get an inkling of the impacts of that.
They talk about it though.
They talk about it, but then in this show, with the news stories,
and
saying
they talk about it in the news stories.
Oh yeah, in the news. Yeah, you see like, wow, this was you saw a very small portion of a much bigger, more grandiose thing that was taking place in this film.
Yeah.
Which was so cool to me because it was a small plot that showed you that it had a huge impact, because I think that show as well had a huge impact for me. So I don't know.
It was the biggest, and this isn't really a spoiler.
I don't know if I'm explaining that very well. I'm trying to not spoil it.
No, I think it's really interesting. It puts context in it because you get not necessarily global, but nationwide impact of what it was. And they specifically say, like in a news segment, how it was the biggest methamphetamine like operation in the history of the United States.
Exactly.
In the history of the United States.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. Exactly. And we got final conclusions to most of the characters.
Yeah.
Which was so beautiful because, like you said, they did stick the landing absolutely with the end of Breaking Bad. This didn't feel like this does any disservice to the original Breaking Bad ending. You can finish it there and leave it there. I will say, if you're going to watch the El Camino movie, you have to have watched Breaking Bad. Yeah,
you have to have watched Breaking Bad.
100%.
You're not going to get any of the kicks out of it if you just randomly watch this movie.
But this is like a nice additional. It's like if you really enjoyed the series and you really liked Aaron Paul's character and you just kind of want to find out, well, what did happen or what's going to happen to him?
Yeah.
Then watch this. And it's done in such a great way,
One of my favorite scenes, I'm not going to tell you the specifics of it or what it involves. They talk about high school diplomas.
That's a great one. I like the soup scene. We talked about
yeah,
for you. One of the things that's so great about Vince Gilligan still is that like he knows, and we've seen this with Better Call Saul especially, he knows humor too.
Yeah.
And he can have these moments that are like tense and awful, but also have a bit of humor to them.
Yeah.
And it kind of is this weird, you're like drawn in both directions with it. And that was a perfect example, that scene. And it was nice as well because you're not just getting with Jesse's character sense of like just what's going to happen to him, but you also get a sense of like redemption and hopefulness, and that his character is going to finish off better than where he started. Yeah. At least in a small way, that there is hope for him and there's a future for him. And so it was cool to see some of the returning faces. I will say that it's very noticeable with some of the characters, like, okay, these people have aged. So they look, you know, especially Jesse, who's like, you know,
if he's like playing his younger self or something like that, you're like, he was a little skinnier, maybe.
A little bit of junk in there, which I'm not one to talk. I mean, I've grown and gotten bigger since I'm older. But it wasn't distracting, and that's a forgivable thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But like I said, I think they aimed this film in just the right direction. Vince Gilligan did a very good job of kind of knowing what this is and not trying to make it bigger than it needed to be, with trying to like tie in all of this huge stuff, but just making it a very straightforward story about Jesse Pinkman. Yeah.
I think this needs to be looked at as an episode. Yeah. Like I don't know.
Kind of like after you finish reading Harry Potter, you know, you get the last little chapter to kind of tell you like what happens with Harry Potter and his kids and all
that's
that
funny. Now that you bring that up, I remember thinking watching that last little like tag at the end of the Harry Potter series. I'm like, they don't look like grown-ups.
No, that was horrible. I was like, you should have just recast. I'm sorry. Or like do some sort of like body swap with their faces. I was like, they look like kids pretending to be adults in that. Yeah. So
I really like this movie though.
I did too. Really sorry to get distracted. But I really like this. I think it's one of those movies I can't say it's for everybody just because you have to have seen Breaking Bad. But hey, if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, there's no better time than now. It's a great show. It's not for
it's
kids.
All on Netflix. You can literally watch it all on Netflix. So.
Absolutely. So what are you going to rate this one?
I'm going to go pretty high on this one. I'm going to give it a 93.
All right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm giving it a 91.
Right on.
Yeah. I'm not going to explain any further. I give it a 91. So
there's some good treats in Breaking Bad fans. So if you're a Breaking Bad fan, there's some really, really cool surprises, I think. And just as a disclaimer on top of that, it's not a kids show. So if you're like one of the people that's looking for family friendly entertainment, this is not that. El Camino or Breaking Bad.
Yeah, so. I will say the last 10 minutes before the last few minutes of the movie were probably the most satisfying almost for Jesse Pinkman's character I've seen in a while. It's like Jesse,
for real,
science,
so
stuff.
Good, so good,
cool.
he so good. I don't want to talk about it.
No worries. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up on the podcast. Again, just some reminders of ways to get connected, realreviewmedia.com, facebook.com/realreviewmedia, Instagram and Twitter are both at realreviewmedia, as always spelled REEL. And then last but not least, we'd love to hear from you and your thoughts. If you got a chance to see Gemini and you thought, hey, why do those guys look like fake rubbery men? Or you saw El Camino and thought, man, I loved it. Shoot us an email. Let us know your thoughts and perspectives. Realreviewmedia@gmail.com is the place to do that. So anything further, Matt? Any exciting stuff coming up?
No.
Film-wise or?
Zombieland 2 comes out this week.
Double tap.
Yep.
Cool. Well, it's been real.
It's been real.